Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting of the City Council to order and ask Ms. Mann to call the roll.
Mayor Parrish?
Here.
Vice Mayor Vaney?
Here.
Councilmember Bass? Here. Councilmember Elston?
He's here.
Councilmember Lovejoy?
I'm here.
Councilmember Sadecki? Here. Councilmember Wolf?
And Mr. Wolf has just texted me indicating he's caught in traffic. He will, I'm certain, be here shortly. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome staff and citizens alike. Good to have everybody here. Mr. Post.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's actually, I think, colder than last night, but not as messy outside, at least from my perspective. We're going to start on just going straight into the general fund tonight. I think we hit you with the big issues that you need to continue to mull over and discuss amongst yourselves as to what you want to do about those. And then tonight, as we go through the general fund, we'll talk about a few of the other things that were brought up yesterday, but primarily to see what other questions you might have in any of these areas. And we've got a variety of staff here to help answer that, in addition to Diane who put the document together.
And what page?
We're going to start on page 115.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we won't go through this, we'll go through the general fund portion. We'll basically go back to fire and rescue. We'll stop. I'm not spending a whole lot of time on this, but the general fund, that first page is the revenue overview for the general fund. Again, you'll see the general revenues up there in the top. We've talked about those already. You know what general property taxes are, other local taxes, meals, personal property. One other big one in there. Motor vehicle taxes primarily are where the increases there are. And that other local revenue, when we talk about the engineering department that's been moved to the general fund, most of that money is just transferred in from the areas that they're serving. So it's really treating it like an internal service fund, so those monies are just transfers in. There are some additional grant funds down in, you'll see in federal government categorical that we are programming in and planning for. And then the use of fund balance down the bottom, that's the one-time funds, one-time capital funds that we talked about yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit more about as we go along today. So that's just is there general questions? We'll keep moving. So just stop me when you get something and you want to ask questions. So I'm not going to talk about the revenue by department because we're going to go by department. I talked about by function the other night. As I admit, go ahead. So raise your hand.
Because we have a summary on 116, we are seeing a decrease here in public works community development. Is that right?
And we'll go through the exact amounts for all the departments. But yes, it is showing on the overall a slight decrease in public works. And when we get to that department, we'll talk about specifically what makes that up. Okay, we're going to keep going. We'll start really when we get on page 119. Basically, we've got the expenditure broken up a couple different ways with explanations for the public or other folks that may want to look at it at different fashions. 119 starts City Council, so you can see a small amount of revenues that are there and a slight decrease, a few $100s. On 120 is actually the overview of the expenditures there. Nothing significantly changing. There's a little bit of, you can read at the bottom, a little bit of change in the Treasury audit that was done this year, so that's been taken out. It doesn't have to be repeated. And a little bit of an increase in existing audit services. A few memberships that had some increase as well. So only a few $1,000 difference in that total budget.
Mr. Lovejoy.
Just out of curiosity, the largest line item is purchase services. What are purchase services?
And they would have to be purchased?
Thank you, Ms. Besky. Could you expand a little beyond Ms. Besky's highlight as to what McGovern said purchase services?
That's primarily the attorney.
Oh.
Attorney fees.
Can I ask you a question on that and follow up?
Yes, sir.
So, says, which would be the best to look at, adopted 17 or amended?
Adopted is your best comparison.
So you've got city
Apples to
attorney
apples.
3, okay, so it's 2017 adopted city attorney 3375.
Mm-hmm.
And then in addition to that, we purchased 436,900 of city attorney? Explain.
It's just two different ways of breaking up the same total, $722,000.
There are other purchase
There
orders.
are other purchase services throughout all of these divisions at the bottom. So the city attorney division is the 337. All of those divisions combined are broken up into
Is that the total amount you paid for city attorney?
337?
That's the total
337,
budget.
no.
That's what council.
No,
There are
attorney.
attorney bills in other departments.
Okay, that's
In the
what-
general fund piece, that's what we're
So is
saying.
it possible to see a total?
Yes, we,
So this is what, 337,500 is what attorney fees were charged to city council work,
to the general fund.
to the general fund. Okay.
To anything that's not in a separate department, a separate fund.
So I guess I'm just looking for a total.
Yes,
Thank you.
we can provide that. I think we've prepared that before, and we'll prepare that again.
So I think maybe if you broke it out, where those
Yeah.
expenditures are going, I think that would be helpful.
Yes.
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 So we're seeing a total, but also where those,
It would be labor intensive, but we can break it out. I will have to find out how, because we get multiple bills and it's billed by activity. So for example, like Prince William Street is an activity, so the work they build on Prince William Street for like the condemnation stuff, we get bills for that. We get bills for by departments, broken down by departments. So, but I'm not sure if electronically we keep that. I'd have to check with the
I mean,
county.
even if it's estimated, like what are we spending on like social services
Yeah.
versus engineering, right away, quick takes versus, that's just broad categories. It's fine.
It is, as Brian, we can break it out, but there's a lot of work to do in that, because the bills are basically sent in 10-minute increments. And
Right.
every month you get a list of all the things. We'll,
Broad
I
categories.
think we can get something to you.
Thank
I
you.
think we can.
One additional piece in addition to just the dollars, might be interesting also to know the hours that were being billed.
All right, that'll probably take us a little bit of time to get all that together. We'll work on getting something for it. Any other questions on the city council? Okay, city clerk, see no changes in positions. Should have mentioned we have no changes in council positions either. No increases that I'm aware of. And the clerk, so you turn to the next page, you can see on 123, only some changes in internal services, and you'll see internal service changes quite a bit throughout the general fund, so you want to just do a broad.
What's internal services?
We can ask you.
Sure, you can just ask me, and everybody. We have 3 internal service funds: vehicle charges, computer IT charges, and building maintenance charges. All broken out different ways. They change every year. The general fund as a whole increased because for primarily IT charges due to the new financial system, ongoing maintenance charges. And everything else was paid. The other 2, building maintenance charges to the general fund, are flat, and as our vehicle maintenance charges went down slightly.
And I think even though overall they're flat, there was a little, a reallocation of how they were.
There is a reallocation of them every year.
There's always a
We always come up with better ways to allocate every year, so you'll see them in and out, all different departments.
I say that
Every
because
year.
here in just a moment, you're going to see a really big one that I had to ask about earlier, so I just wanted to.
Whose is it, yours?
Yes.
Very nice.
It means I decided to charge
Charges
them.
a whole lot of stuff. So,
I'll explain that one.
so again, the clerk's budget is, and I'll say the direction that's given to departments, based on where we're at, is to prepare a budget that meets the existing services within the existing revenue streams that they have. So all of our departments are not asking, there's a few If they really have a new service that they need to meet some kind of mandate, they'll ask for that. That'll be a supplemental request. But in general, departments are submitting budgets to deal with the existing service levels that we have and the existing priorities that are out there. So you won't see a lot of changes for the most part. You see,
Give me an example about the internal service charges that the city clerk's budget would pay for. IT services?
yes,
Yes. Hers would,
and a portion of building
and a
maintenance.
portion of building maintenance of City Hall.
So the whole building fund, all based on square footage, everybody's allocated out of a certain amount.
And what are all the purchase services going to be the turnkey?
No,
I have like muni code updates when I send off ordinances to municipal code. They charge me to update it online, to print it, to make any edits, to post it on.
significantly different for each department, what they purchase. Okay, anything else on the clerk? You'll see it in each department, on 124 as an example, there, you'll see some of their description of the things that they're doing, some of the key objectives that they want to accomplish for next year, and some of the key service efforts and measures that we are measuring for each of these areas. And some of those will be highlighted more as we go through. City manager starts on 125. We did move the deputy city manager out of the utilities funds into this fund last year, or into the manager's office last year.
So, and is that why the utilities, public works, airport engineer have a rate? Is that reflective of that he's still over them or he's not?
He is still over those,
But
but
he's paid now
in the general fund,
not out of utilities at all?
not directly out of utilities. There still is an indirect cost allocation plan, so a portion of the time of all staff services are allocated back to the enterprise funds based on the percentage of time that we use those. So when you see services like HR will have some internal service charges that will be, not internal service, but there'll be some cost allocation plan. So each of the other funds, the fire and rescue fund, the social services fund, the electric, the water and sewer, they'll all pay a piece of those costs based on how much services they're getting.
Right, but, so two questions about that. So is Brian keeping track of, you just come up with general percentages that you allocate throughout the year, 20%, or based on?
Right. No, yes, we're not tracking it hour for hour. There is a
But in the
program.
past, it was a larger percentage that was coming out of utilities. Is that a true statement? And now it's not
The position that I used to create this one was originally
in utilities?
was my most position. And even though it was actually overseeing both electric, water and sewer and public works, it was being charged entirely to the electric fund.
But now that's not happening
That is not happening anymore.
in this budget?
And in last year's budget.
Okay.
We changed it last year and it continues this year. Okay.
Mr. Elston.
Page 126, I did have a question on the tax dollar support. If you could explain the 7% decrease.
What page, Mr. Elston?
126,
126.
tax dollar support. It looks like we're coming back in line with 2016, but I'm not entirely sure.
The 62%.
Yeah, just if you could just walk us through that, just because it's not readily apparent to me what that is.
He has more revenue from cost allocation, i.e. the other funds that he associated with him, which would then decrease his tax support. So,
In essence, when moving the deputy manager into our account, a significant portion of his time is actually allocated towards those enterprise funds, so a significant amount of his costs are still paid for by them. So when you add that back into our total, that's why you get the 62%.
So that's simply so it's telling us that the rest of it is represented somewhere else in the budget. Is that right? So it's not general fund. That's a reflection of general fund.
Right. The 62% is the amount of money that is coming from general property taxes allocated to the city manager's office. So of the total budget here of 2.7, which again is the communications, HR, and the city manager's office, $1 million of that is being supported by cost allocation. And so the balance of that, the 1.6, is coming out of general tax dollars. That'll be true on all the departments when you look at those charts of how that's broken out.
I'll wrap my head around that. If I still have questions, I'll ask you. Thank you.
Mr. Page, let me make sure that I understand it. The enterprise funds that are paid for with electric, for example, electric water and sewer, pay into the city manager's cost allocation.
That's correct.
As do other departments that are funded by the general fund.
That's, well, the other departments, so like the police department, who's in the general fund, they don't have a cost allocation because they're already supported by general tax revenues. That's a unique thing about government accounting versus business accounting. We have a general fund, so, and then we have all the enterprise and other funds. So let's just use electric, since you started that example. The electric fund is supported by the city's finance system, by our HR program, by our IT program, by the city manager's office, by city council. So a portion of all of those costs are paid for by the utility fund. So the utility rate pays for the administration that they're getting from the rest of the city. So that's what those numbers represent. Okay. Moving right along, 127 is kind of the overview, so I'm almost going to turn back to the next page. 128 divides it into the three main areas that we have. So you've got administration there, and that's where you can see the major change there is really an internal service reallocation to us a cost of some sort. Otherwise, the things that we had control over, you see there's a slight $700 decrease. The communications, you can basically see is that's right now it's just Patty Prince's area, but we're looking at some possible positions to add some more support into the communications area. So I will bring that back before we finalize the budget. And human resources is the next division that's under there. And again, you'll see a decrease there because of a difference in the way we're showing how we pay for merit increases. Okay. So that decreases, that money is just somewhere else in the budget. It's not a real decrease.
Yeah, that's my question.
Voter registration. We've tried to answer the questions before we have a chance to ask. Again, no change in positions there. You see the same chart showing kind of how much is general fund support versus that we get from a little bit of money from the Commonwealth on that. On 134, it shows basically the budget is showing a decrease because of the extraordinary expenses that were put in this year to purchase new voter machines. And in their amended budget for this year, the likelihood is we're going to have to amend that again to pay for the special election. So I don't know how much that will cost me right now, but that will likely have to come out of our contingency fund. 15 to 20,000 is what they would estimate. Okay. Moving on, 136 is the treasurer. Again, no change in positions. No significant changes in revenues. And in the expenditures, the big issue there again is some changes in the internal service charges. And a lot of that's likely related to the ERP system where they're getting a new system and they have a lot of activity in that system.
How about change in pay?
Pay is, we'll get to that later on, but pay has always been budgeted outside. It's not included in these accounts so that you can see what real differences are there. So the pay is in the non-departmental right now, as it always has been, and will be allocated out as we adopt the budget. Okay, Commissioner Revenue on 140. Again, no change in positions, no request, a slight, no change in revenues that we're expecting from the Commonwealth, and just a slight reduction in expenditures. And I don't even know what that's basically internal service. That's a reallocation. That's probably some of the money I had to pay for now that the city manager. Oh, that's giving me the vehicle. And that's actually a good thing to point out, since we're here talking about that one. One of the things that we've done out of our, because we do pay attention to our fleet management, and we've got an internal service fund of theirs. We had a separate vehicle assigned to HR and to the Commissioner of Revenues. Neither vehicle which was being driven a tremendous amount. So we have talked to both departments. We've eliminated one vehicle, taken the second vehicle and put it in a shared spot. Actually, Andrea's got the keys to that now, and then departments can come and check that out as they need to. So we've eliminated one vehicle out of this budget. That's reflected there in the Commissioner of Revenues budget to be more efficient.
Can I ask a question about? So in the commissioner, and I know that you have dialogue with all of these department heads. This one is of particular interest because of the timing that we talk about every year.
Right.
So does the Commissioner of Revenue feel that the staff is sufficient to do the job on time and manner?
And Doug can come in and talk for himself if you want to. I'll tell you that he does. My conversation with him is that he's comfortable with the staff level that he has. The issue of when he produces the assessment is based more on an interpretation of what he has from the Commonwealth law that says that they're supposed to be based on the values as of January 1st of each year. So the difference between how Manassas does it versus some other communities, there are other communities that will not take that January 1st literally. So they may do a lot of their assessments based on sales up through maybe October, November, and then produce an assessment roll based on that. Doug is trying to make sure that his assessment roll is accurate as of January 1st. So he's using sales data through the end of the calendar year, and so the month of January and early in February, he's doing all his assessments, and that's why we get an assessment number late February or March, as opposed to earlier in the process. Adding more people would not change that. Change the philosophy of when he cuts off his sales comparison could change that, could move that up earlier. But that's, I think, from Doug's perspective, he is doing what he is required to by Commonwealth law. Is that too long? Finance starts on 144, I believe. Again, no changes in positions at this point in finance administration, and a little bit of change in cost allocation there as well. You can see, I have finance right here, so I can let him speak for himself as we go through. If you've got questions, you can. Finance administration on 148. Again, internal service charges went down tremendously in finance because they have control of that.
We moved it all to Mr. Page. No, they moved out of Paul's division to accounting, so I did it. Budget and accounting. We decided we use the system more than Paul.
And they told me they asked us, so they moved it to me. So yes, you'll see on the next page on budget on 150, you'll see that there's an increase there, but it's only, that's again, internal service funds, everything else balances out. Accounting would be the next page over 152. Again, more internal service charges there. Everything else is the same. Purchasing will be a big area for us this year with Jimmy Falls retiring. We've got some big shoes to fill there, although I think we've got some very capable staff that Paul assures we can keep.
How long has he run the city?
How long has he been with the city?
5 years.
35. So again, no major changes in finance at this point. Shared services start on page 155. You can see we get no extra money for that. If you look on page 156, and this is one that people forget about a lot, but it's easy to overlook. But basically, you can see that $10.5 million of our budget goes towards activities that we share primarily with Prince William County and Manassas Park. So you can see the corrections, and corrections on 157 breaks that down a little bit more, but that's our, primarily the jail, but also juvenile care, some of our juvenile detention, so a few other things. We pay a portion of the Commonwealth Attorney, portion of the courts, sheriff, area agency on aging, public health. Ignore that that's a negative number, that should be a question that you're going to ask. That's because of the financing, that's because the Prince William County Finance accounting group runs this, and so they're manipulating numbers in terms of how they send it to us. So we are getting public health services, and we are paying our fair share of those, but this is showing a negative that will actually go away.
Yeah, because that was actually, since you mentioned it, yes, I was confused by that, particularly because it's next to community services that has gone up significantly, and some of that we get, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't some of our community services come through certain revenues from state and federal? Or is this strictly the expenses of?
All of these areas would have a much larger budget than what you're seeing here.
This is just our portion.
And in our portion, they would take out whatever state and federal revenues they get.
Okay.
What's left, they would divide out.
Okay, so I had assumed that until I saw a negative number. So maybe that's what's, so obviously that's not what's causing the problem.
And I will say on this one, we have to wait on Prince William County to actually adopt the budget to get a good handle on what we think our numbers will be. This is based on a traditional 2% increase that we get each year for shared services. But we will not have actual numbers until later in the year. Well, actual numbers not until the end of the year, but their budget numbers once they adopt a budget.
So obviously I'm concerned, I mentioned it the other day, the General Assembly did not fill Lon Ferris's judgeship. We've certainly been in a case before where we have seen the judge, I'm sorry?
I say though they had the money.
Though they had the money. No, it was, I think, a terrible blow to our jurisdiction. And knowing that that's going to slow the docket down, increase the jail population, and knowing that lots of good things have happened to sort of address those jail costs, but there is a balloon coming. I wonder if we think that we ought to have a contingency fund in this area to address that.
That's a fair point. I think we have some contingency built in, and in this case, in that particular case, the court cost would go down a little bit because we're not paying for a judge. But the likelihood is that our corrections costs are going to go up because we're going to have folks being detained longer. If I had to guess, I would say that our jail costs are going to be much higher than the cost of a judge.
I don't think there's any question about that. In fact, I don't know if anybody else has. I've certainly talked to lots of people down in our General Assembly. It's, if there's one service they can provide for the localities, it's.
You had one job.
You get one job, that's exactly it, and I really feel like they fell down, but it's certainly going to fall to us. I'm not certain that it's the only thing that's going to fall to us as money for addiction services and that diversion stuff that we talk about seems to be drying up as well. Those costs are going to go up for us in the jail.
And I'm going to ask Doug just to speak for a minute. There's a lot of work going on amongst the judicial system to try to improve the time that the recidivism or the time that people are having to spend in the jails. So that's helping us with the jail costs too.
We remember I spoke about this at the work session of the evidence-based decision-making work team for the first time in their history. The complete judicial system is working together, law enforcement, the magistrate, the probation, jail, and the judges. So one of the initiatives of that is to reduce the actual jail time, and more importantly, what you just spoke about, how much time are you waiting to get in to see a judge or to get your court hearing, and at the same time, putting more decisions back in our lap, allowing officers to have more input. Should I release this person on a summons? Is it worthwhile? Are they a member of the community? Remember, the purpose is to get them into court, not to necessarily incarcerate them and get them on bond, but to ensure they show up for court. So we're all together working on that, and if we have the same success that Charlottesville, Albemarle County did they were able to reduce their cost jail days by 25 to 27%. So I'm not saying we're going to be there, but we have already seen a reduction in that as we proceeded in allowing these decisions to be made at a lower level. Again, part of that is who wants to be held accountable for that decision, who let that person out, and then they go out and commit another crime. So getting everybody on the table saying it's a joint effort, we're really putting more thought process in how we analyze that and what is the true risk factor to the community. So instead of just putting a bond and keeping them in jail.
Yeah, and I appreciate that report. This is an issue that I've been keeping a pretty close eye on across the state. Do we know, since you're up, Chief, the increased ICE costs, is that coming to the locality? Do we have any word on that, the increased ICE activity, really across the country, but certainly across our region?
So how our detainers work here, so if we incarcerate someone, that program's been moved to the jail, which is appropriate. If they put a detainer on this person, once they have fulfilled their local time, any days they stay after that is billed back to the federal government. And you've heard Colonel Milius speak about that before. Those additional days, once they fulfill our obligation, are billed back to the feds. And to be honest with you, they pay the bill. They don't mind. As long as they're incarcerated and we're doing the job that they would have to do somewhere else. So most of those detainers are housed at local detention centers, not in federal centers anyway.
Right, but that's a jail cost, and so the reason I ask is because we're talking about a general court slowdown. Isn't that the docket?
Yes, sir, it is, and that's one of the things that may impact this evidence-based decision-making. Again, that's the reason we're trying to catch it before it gets to court, so that we don't have to have that bond down. But there's no doubt it's going to impact officers' times for those cases that are being held. Officers are going to be spending more time, and we're already starting to see a little bit of that already. Longer day in court, longer day off, or after a shift. But one of the things that Pete has been, Colonel Milius, has always been adamant about is there has to be bed space, first of all. So if he doesn't have the bed space, then the feds have to come get him and take him somewhere else. Hopefully I answered your question.
I do, and forgive me, but I do have one more question about the jails, because
This is a good point.
on land use, we were told that the jail expansion costs were going up 25%. Is that in this budget then? Thank you, Chief.
There is a jail expansion that's going on. I do have a meeting that I think has just been set up today with my counterparts in the county to talk about where some things are at with that. But to my knowledge, the existing, this reflects what we will have to pay next year. Now, there may be coming down the road some additional costs related to the expansion of the jail, and I'm pretty confident that the numbers we have here are okay with that, but yes, there may be some future costs. But we are working on some other consolidation efforts too, to make the more things we can put together so that they're not spread out with the folks that are administering the jail, then the less costs we'll have as well. So some of those efforts and the things that the Chief was talking about, trying to reduce the population, are helping in that regard. So.
But just to be clear, so that this corrections number takes into account, Chief, you were the one who gave us that report, that 25% number that was going up in the projected cost of the jail expansion.
Well, the part of the jail expansion you saw, when they were expecting to bring that on, Colonel Milius began to pre-hire. They can't open it up and not have the staff. So as they were projecting to add new staff, he was hiring them ahead of time. And then I believe the next phase is going to be the remodeling of the old section, which requires them to move some things to the new section. So there's a lot of moving pieces to the correction side.
We have not even put out for bid the new expansion.
So that's not this fiscal year.
They're finalizing that. So once they even put that out to bid, then you've got a construction time frame, and then there may be some additional costs related to remodeling of some of the space they're moving out on.
And he's constantly looking at ways to save that money in that bed space and save money. But as Mr. Pate said, there's so many moving pieces that we're trying to get ahead of and predict, and it's not an easy thing to get our hands around.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody's time, it's just
Good. So we are seeing some additional costs in the future, but right
seeing
now,
some movement there.
we
so.
feel like this is a good set of numbers for us.
Just a thought, I know Mr. Elston is aware of the challenge that we had several years ago when our budget was almost immediately impacted by a phone call made to us by Prince William County with regard to the increase in our court, not court, but corrections costs. So it went up substantially in 1 year. So it's an important piece.
Yeah, it just feels like, as you say, there are so many moving pieces on this.
And it's part of that shared services that you see the list of there that we pay, what is it, 10 million? 10 million.
More than 10.5. Mr.
Evane.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I have a couple questions too, along the lines of Mr. Elston, although somewhat different. So just to be clear, most of these, if not all, are like assessed on a per capita basis, and they're bundled together. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, corrections is not. Corrections is
separate.
It's based on beds. How many folks we have that are actually using the beds,
Yeah.
so it's divided that way, so it's not really per capita. Most of the other ones that come with the attorney courts, sheriff, area agency on aging, those are per capita.
So we don't really have any ability to change that. In other words, it comes to us as an agreement, and whatever the per capita is, generally those have those numbers.
Unless we do something different on that, like we did with the library.
And so then I want to talk about the library, because the library here has been pretty consistent at 1.3. So we're assuming, relative to one of the items you have in your expanded CIP, if you want to call it that, and how does that 1.3 figure in with what you show in that expanded CIP? I mean, is the assumption that...
They're separate. The CIP is talking about capital expenditures. This is operating expenditures to have a library. The assumption all along has been if we were to replace Central with a library in the city and potentially one in Manassas Park, then the operating costs that we're already giving to the system would be the cost that would be used to operate the system, the building that we would have, the library part of the building that we have in Manassas.
So you're saying, but that's just based on our assumptions, or have the other partners said that?
That's been based on the discussions we've had with the three partners.
So if we opened a new library, bigger, about the same size, we would still expect that 1.3 million would be the operating cost?
Yeah, it's more, almost 1.4, but yes.
1.4, yeah.
Our assumptions are that we would operate a library within the same operating costs that we're currently contributing to the library system.
Okay, just checking.
Okay. Ms. Sebeski.
Thank you. Do we know how many of our residents use the library? Do we get a count from Prince William to know how many people use the library?
We get information on how many library users there are. I mean, it's a little different from the number you're asking, but yes, we get information on the percentage of library users. They can tell us how many library cards are issued in the city, those kind of things.
So then how many library cards, but not how many people are actually going in and checking out books?
They can tell by branch. We've gotten that report in the past, like how many city residents go to which branch.
We know how many, based on the usage. I mean, I can tell you, I think we have it. Do you have it already available?
Sorry, Mayor, I don't have it with me this evening, but we have that available by branch. And then we can compile that for total.
Could we get that perhaps for next time?
We can do it last fiscal year, or do you want it, they do it monthly? Do you want it to date, or?
Whatever numbers you have available.
We'll go jump to the general report. I think we've got some of that in the library.
Will that help?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. What about for the health department? Do we know how many people in the health department are from, I don't know, I'm just throwing numbers out there because I have no idea. If there are 4,000 people serviced a year at the health department, how many are from Manassas City versus Prince William County?
Not off the top of my head, we can see if we can get it.
Thank you. That's
In general, in all of those services, they're available to anybody in the county or the city, and so that's why there have been traditionally proportional on a per capita basis. So it's, the assumption is that, whoever, that the same proportion of folks in the city are using it as the folks in the county. But I can tell you some areas like area agency on aging would probably have a higher proportion of users because the senior center is located in the middle of the city.
But there's more than one
Prince William
home.
Health Department, and there's two senior centers, one here and one in Woodbridge.
And the health department's the same, correct? There's one here and there's
Most
one
of them,
Woodbridge?
yes, most of them have, usually they have one on both ends of the county, and sometimes in the central part. Libraries are another example where you got libraries spread out over the city. And just to, you probably weren't a part of these discussions when we did this, but just to reiterate, on the library cost, we renegotiated out, and it's a part of this agreement, the two new libraries that the county built, the city is not contributing towards those in terms of capital or operating cost. We negotiated those out of our agreement so that those are funded entirely by Prince William County. If we had paid a proportionate share of those, our budget would have gone up by almost $1 million for library services.
Mr. Payne,
And how long, I'm so sorry, how long do we have that? So when you renegotiated this, how long was that contract good for? 3 years, 5 years? And so when did you do?
Last year.
Last year? 2 years ago, so what, 3 years?
Mr. Lojo had a question.
And just a point of clarification. So we were able to negotiate ourselves out of investing in the capital for the libraries that were well away from the city. But if the county chose to raise and rebuild Central and modernize it, we would have to pay into that capital expense where it is.
Yes,
Okay,
the agreement basically talked about new facilities that they were rebuilding outside of the area.
Outside of the area. But we would have no excuse not to have to pay into a new Central if it were rebuilt where it is. And is there consensus amongst the partners that Central is approaching its end of life? Or exceeded its end of life?
I would say there's...
It's dead already.
It's like a lot of things that we have. I think there's consensus that that building is an older building and it is not a new modern library.
It's a fact.
Can that building continue to serve as a library? Yes. Is it getting closer to the end of its useful life? Yes. So when is that 2 years, 5 years, 8 years? That's a matter of...
Vague yet not committal. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
But in terms of that 5-year agreement, with the Manassas Park and Manassas City not taking part of that capital expense on the other end of the county, it really did commit us to the capital expenses for Central when those happened.
When the time.
As a part of that agreement, we basically talked about whatever Central was going to be, whether it was going to continue there, whether it was going to be expanded in place, whether we were going to look at something that would be different in the city, in both cities. We would all be a part of that agreement and discussion. So yes, if Central is expanded or renovated, we will share in those costs proportionally. And that's part of our agreement.
And that's part of the challenge that we have right now with regard to the libraries. That agreement continued the shared services agreement on libraries as we had had for for decades. But the difference is we're sort of agreeing as partners that Manassas Park may want to get out or reduce their costs by creating a small library in their recreation center and have a lower cost to them. Prince William County is looking at an older building that might in some future moment need to be upgraded or changed or replaced. And we're potentially looking at a library that might serve this community as well as Prince William in a larger way, closer to Old Town here. And so the important part for us is, I think, we've got an agreement that has a deadline for us to take some sort of action. So that's where we are.
Important. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else at this point on the shared services? Okay, there's a lot of, on the next couple pages, it talks about some of the things that we get out of those areas in the city. Moving on to 160, I want to start getting into some bigger general fund areas, the police department. Here, in terms of positions, you'll see some some reallocation, reorganization that Doug's made. But the primary new positions that we've talked about are in the communications center, and there's one new position that's showing up in here that's related to the drug task force administration that we brought administratively into the city, as opposed to wherever it was before, Falls Church or somewhere like that.
Yes, sir. It was tied into the academy financial plan, which, if you recall, Falls Church takes that academy finance burden onto their role. So we brought it in under us when I took over as the chairperson. And then this is a part-time person. I call it revenue neutral because we are reimbursed by the members of the game task force. But this gives me some control and gives the person here a little bit better plan than what was in place.
And then, and look, might as well let Doug keep standing, but in the communications center, this is one of those areas that you've asked about, things that we did not fully fund that were asked by departments. The original request from Doug was to fund one additional position per shift, which would be 3 positions in the communications center. We've looked at it and have agreed to basically try it at 1.5 positions to start with, and see if we can deal with the issues there in terms of staffing. And if not, that we'll come back next year, and I'll be asking you for additional positions in the comm center. This 1.5 allows us to hire a full-time and a part-time. Theoretically, if Doug found 3 people that wanted to work part-time, he might do 3 part-time positions to see if that would work. In essence, what he really needs, and I'll let him speak for himself, is some fill-in time for when people are out sick, vacation, and we've had some vacancies as well. So this is, I think, very necessary for us to run an effective 911 communications center. So you want to add to that?
Let's see if there's any questions. You did a good job.
Okay.
It was easy.
Well, you may not be finished yet. Then we'll turn on to page 162, which gives the overall police department budget, and then we break it down as we go forward a little bit, but you'll again see overall out of a total budget of $15 million, there's only $43,000 in changes in here, so very, very negligible in reality.
Mr. Payne, may I ask a quick question? Back on 161, and I know I've probably asked this each year that I've served on council too, but the line item for school resource officers, so how are we coordinating that now with the schools?
And I take you back in history a little bit, is that is a reimbursement from the schools. That's the agreement that we had in place when we added those. However, take you back into October when we added the school bus farm enforcement. One of the things that we agreed upon is that we, as the city as a whole, any revenue generated from that would be deferred to the schools, and that would help them offset the cost of the SROs, so that, again, my wording almost becomes revenue neutral for them as well. Our projection right now, you've heard me speak about how many violations, well over $200,000 if we stay on the pace that we are, which would make that revenue neutral.
That's okay.
Yes, some people, it's multiple violations for the same people each month.
All those things. Long term, we hope that will actually
Yeah, we hope
reduce.
that would go down.
That will reduce, but that's.
Yeah, the whole idea is that this is a safety initiative, and that's when Mr. Payton and I spoke, is anyone who wanted to argue that you're doing it for revenue, we're not asking for the revenue, we're taking the burden on managing it, but the revenue is going back to the education department to help them offset some of their costs.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Vaney?
Thank you, Your Honor. I had 2 questions about the 2 task forces that we do. One is the gang task force. You had mentioned, I think Monday night, or maybe the mayor had mentioned that you had a conversation with Congresswoman Comstock about we used to get a lot more support from, I don't know if it's proper to say her office or from Congress.
I'm sorry.
Anything about that?
When the game task force first began, that was an earmark from Mr. Wolf. It was around $1 million. That's how we began. The gang task force earmarks went away. The grant funding went away. That's when we had to take that burden on with each jurisdiction of sharing the cost, and that's what we're currently doing. I did have that meeting on Saturday after the parade. Remember that grant and earmark is also not just enforcement, it's prevention as well, component. And she listened, but as she says, and as we all know, earmarks are still not on the table. It's something they are still discussing, but she will do what she can. And we are constantly looking. One of the things of bringing that person on, that .75 person, is it now allows me to have someone that can help research grant opportunities to help offset some of those costs as well.
And if I can follow on, so the increase from 17 to 18 is pretty substantial, the 25 to the 100. Could you talk about that a little bit? If you see that in your...
That's bringing the person home.
That's the 75 is for the
That's the money
admin
that's coming
person.
in, yes.
Yes, that is reimbursed. That's not it's shared by us, but that's all members of the task force pay into that. So we build back the gang task force and they reimburse us at cost.
So of the 100,000 we're paying, 75,000 is being reimbursed?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I had another question about the, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force.
The ICAC, we call it ICAC,
Okay.
yes, sir.
So we have one officer who participates in that. You talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that is a grant comes, a
That's
federal
very
grant that comes in
Okay.
through the state, back to the state police, and then we have one member that is assigned there, and then that grant is then reimbursed for that position as well.
And so that gives us support at all times
Yes,
for
sir.
those.
7 days a week, they are called out frequently. Again, that's a task force that attacks it on a regional basis, even though they are assigned to local cases. When we need them, it's an entire unit that comes, and they have different components that specialize in different things. We have all those resources are ours
to
if we
us.
need them.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
By the way, Chief, let me give you a pat on the back, though you may not need it. It's having brought that question up to Barbara Comstock, Congresswoman Comstock, is a good thing. I'm glad you did it, and thank you for it. It gives us all an opportunity whenever we see her to follow on.
I got my kilt on, hoping that would soften her up a little bit.
Work on the legs. Work on the legs. Leg day.
Yeah, sorry, let's move on.
I was gonna say, we're not gonna discuss legs. Real quick, on page 162, when it talks about the summary of department expenditures, it looks like there's only a change of about 43,000, is that correct?
That is correct.
But yet, there's an addition of 1.5 staff? Does that mean that I'd like to know where we're getting 1.5 for
The
43,000?
new staff is not shown in these numbers yet. Until
Okay.
That's a part of our, that's a set aside that we've got for merits and for new positions.
Maybe later you could show where that number is.
You'll see that in just before we finish today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good question.
I was trying to figure out what we're hired for $43,000.
No, that's, the new position costs are not shown in those. But again, to help with apples to apples to get things done. If you keep going there, probably it's easier to look like a police administration starting on 164, get a little bit more breakdown of what's going on. And I would just, I guess, brag on the police department a little bit. Some of the other departments, if you look at some of their service efforts and accomplishments, you really can see some positive things that are going on, like 99% incident-based reporting accuracy. But the costs there are just slightly down when they move things around. If you look at patrol services on 166, again, you can see some positives, service efforts on reaction times, on number of arrests, number of citations. Again, we're basically doing that with the same dollar amount. A little bit of movement around of positions, but not real significant. Investigative services are 168. And again, you can see some closure rates, number of cases that they're dealing with, costs are fairly flat.
So under supplies, there's a relatively significant decrease. Is that one-time only funds in that line?
That's not taken away, we're just moving some of those funds into the admin section so that we have better control on that side of the building, so it's just kind of making everything single point location. A little bit, hopefully efficiency.
And then the philosophy I have with departments is that they have a budget to manage, they're dividing that out, and so if they need to move things around from various divisions to make that happen, so they can manage it appropriately, then by all means do that, and they do. And then you got communications center, so you don't see the increase in the position there yet, 170, but again, we'll talk about that shortly. They do handle a tremendous number of calls over there. I'm always impressed with how much work they do out of that area. And then animal control is 172, the last division there in police. And again, from my standpoint, we're fortunate to have so few calls about animal control in this community. I think they do a good job. The animal shelter is run superbly, and so we've got a really outstanding area there. Any general questions? Again, the police department, like all the other departments, is dealing with the mandate of staying within the existing resources they have and delivering the best services they can. Not outrighting more tickets, just.
Ms. Sebeski.
Nick can write a whole lot of tickets on Richmond Avenue, but probably do.
Would be all your neighbors that would be doing those tickets.
Yes, they would be. They wouldn't like me very much with it. So, I think I asked this question yesterday. With our increase in population, obviously you need a certain amount of police officers per capita. Have we been increasing that as our population has increased, or where are we at in our totals compared to staffing, say, 10 years ago?
That number per capita it depends on the type of community you're policing, the geographic layout. So if it's a more rural area, Western Prince William's could be different than Eastern Prince William. They have a different formula they use. But to get to your specific question, I'm going to answer it this way, and I think I'm pretty consistent with this, is we need to focus on keeping the staff we have.
Absolutely.
Before I come back and ask you for additional bodies. If you gave me 15 new positions, I'm telling you at this point, I couldn't hire them, couldn't train them, and I probably couldn't retain them. So that's the reason and no place to put them as well. So Mr. Payton and I, our focus has been, as you've seen last year and the year before, of trying to put programs in place so that we can keep the staff we have and we can focus on recruiting, as I call it, the best people to fit Manassas. That's where our focus is at this fiscal year as well. We have a lot of other priorities that we will work through over the next few years. I may be back in front of you, but during my annual report, I believe you were provided a copy of that earlier, we used to come to you and say that, we needed 120. I use a different formula. I've always said, based upon the city's geographics, the population trends, we're at 96 sworn, including me in animal control. My formula is going to tell you to do the things that we and our community wants. It's in the low 100s, 101, 102, 103. We're not looking at 20, 25 positions. But again, the focus needs to be on recruitment, retaining, and keeping people.
Absolutely. When you look at what it costs to recruit police officers, firefighters, educators, there's a high recruitment cost and retention cost. And so definitely want to keep the people you've already trained and are familiar with their community. And the community wants people, familiar faces they're familiar with as well. I think for me, the question is, we definitely need to work on all that retention. But part of what can be part of a retention model, a lot of times when people are in public service, they don't always leave because of pay. They can leave because of work conditions being not a reasonable thing. And that's where I was coming from. If that is also an aspect, I'm very familiar with the retention, but wanted to, if we need to provide the correct workload, then we want to do that.
And this is probably a good segue in that, because we didn't spend a lot of time on that on the HR side, but just to reiterate, and back up what Doug was saying, there's kind of two prongs that we're looking at right now in terms of police services right now. One is the retention and recruitment of our employees, and the other one is actually having them an appropriate workspace, which is why we have the public safety building as really the highest priority. So when you're looking at the operational side of the police department, you don't see a lot of changes, but what I am asking you to do is focus on doing a new public safety building. And all of that money will help them not only recruit and retain officers, but help them do their jobs better. On that recruitment and retention side, we have in the last 2 years put in a career ladder program, so officers have some ability to move up. Well, we've done some other changes in how we recruit and how we're looking at that. In this budget, basically to continue to mirror what Prince William County is doing, we are looking at moving our pay ranges up 1%, which is what Prince William is doing. So there's our merit increases that are in there at an average of about 3%. So we don't give any cost of living. So unlike Prince William, everybody will get a 1% bump just because we move the scales. But we will move the scale so our entry level pay will continue to be competitive with our immediate neighbors that are around us. Another thing that's kind of small, but I think it's actually important, is we have included in this budget the creation of a Columbus Day holiday. Two parts to that. One is the Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth, but the constitutional officers are required by the Commonwealth to have a certain number of holidays. We're actually 1 day short from that number that they say we're supposed to have. So we're looking at our proposed adding Columbus Day, but the real beneficiaries of that are police and fire, because they're the officers that are working those days, even if we're off, and their counterparts are getting those days as holiday pay for them. So the amount of money that it'll take to actually add that holiday is about 40,000.
Sorry, between fire rescue and
40,000 citywide. But all of that money goes a little bit to utilities, but almost all of it will go directly to policemen and firemen as pay for those days. So we're doing a lot of things in terms of recognition. That's one of the reasons you see police officers and firefighters in front of you on a very routine basis, is that one is they're doing good work and we want to recognize them, but two, I think that helps with morale to get them in front of you and for us to show our appreciation for what they're doing. So we're doing some, I think we've got things in place to do that. We don't believe we have people that are leaving because they're of workload per se or dissatisfaction, but a lot of them have either career aspirations or we are getting outbid on pay by some areas, particularly for officers that have some experience.
No, I commend you on that, and I'm quite aware of what you all have done over the last year or two to try to help with that. Have you, because it's not really we, but have you looked at separating fire and fire rescue police into a different pay scale than the other city employees, so that?
Actually, yes. We are, and I want to be careful about how we phrase that. We are looking at, in our pay plan, of having a separate area that's police and fire. It's not, it would put them on a different scale per se, but it's basically keeping them in relationship to the other employees. One of the things that I will never recommend to you is that we do something for police and fire that we're not doing for other employees, because the morale problems are just tremendous in doing that on both sides. But there are things that we need to look at. There are some unique nature of police and fire and how that, again, how the rank structure works and how our career ladder works. So both the police and the fire department and our HR department are working together on looking at having a separate pay scale that would just be for police and fire. And so that should come forward in the next year.
And thank you. I'm aware that many of our surrounding jurisdictions do have that separate, so it makes it easier to compare apple to apple, and that's why, I don't want any employee of the city to not feel that their pay is equal and benefits fair and all of that. But in just looking at that, I noticed that many more jurisdictions tend to have that model. We did not, and that's why I asked whether it was something you had looked at.
Yes.
So thank you.
And we're,
Mr. Page, Mr. Lovejoy, I'm just curious, do we do exit interviews? Does do we have data, do we actually have exit interview responses or data on why people are leaving that we can be made privy to, that's anonymous, or I'm just curious as to what the reasons are in that data.
What Darla presented when she did the HR, she showed you our retention and how much we're losing, why we're losing folks. A number of folks we leave are leaving because of retirements, which is not something that somebody planned for and you can't control. But we do exit interviews. I will say not every employee consents to come in and do an exit interview. So a lot of that is anecdotal, but we pay a lot of attention to our employee morale. I don't know that I have to ask, she's out this week, I don't know if I've got anything specific that we can share back, but.
Just on the department level, I know HR does reach out to them, of course, it's their choice. I know public safety, both chiefs, when we lose an employee, we try to sit down with them and determine exactly the reasons why and try to balance that with a response to them and give them some guidance as well. Some of our staff are fairly young and in my opinion, they have things they don't necessarily think through that I offer to them, and sometimes you're able to save them and they don't go away, and others have their minds made up. But I would tell you from my viewpoint, I'm sure Rob's is the same, it's been about the dollar, as they call it. The dollar is $10,000, $15,000 is significant to a 28-year-old person. And then they'll say opportunities. Usually they cannot expand on opportunities that they can't get with us. But the money is the number one thing.
And you have to remember what Darla's presentation was. Our turnover rate is actually much lower than the industry averages. So we actually, even though it hurts us and because we're a smaller department, so losing a couple of officers really has an impact for us on the street or a couple of firefighters. But we're working on some things to deal with that. And I do think we're in reasonably good shape of trying to deal with that.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
So, okay?
Does that do it for police?
Yes, I believe it does. Unless
Want to take a 5-minute break?
we can take a 5-minute break. Yes.
How about a 7-minute break? Be back at 6:45.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Powerful. It is, that's why I was like, I know there's. I I believe you, so I'm just curious if there was two main themes in building money and opportunity, money and facility, money and overwork. What the second place?
Do that between our last meeting and this meeting. So, and I had actually already been told that, and I think, what I'm going to get to is that.
So we need to keep it for a second. Not interested.
See, I used to watch politics, especially. I try to multitask, so I'll be working on one thing, on the background. But yeah, now I travel by myself.
Yeah, do you figure it out?
Well, I'm fair and balanced. You got those fox. I
I've had to force myself to watch the
I would say I'm seeing it start. That was probably one last thing to worry about. I remember I was actually working. Just like those. It's like I'm glad you remember that. So my daughter works in
And we're paying for all that, right?
first job was nothing to do with bonds.
students.
Yeah, I've got it.
That was when they had Prince Law. It's here, right? Yes.
That's my,
I'll send something to that team. Right.
Girl, stop by.
Same time, right?
Stop by.
I'm good. How are you two? I'll tell you when I'm tired.
I reached out to the, fire department that you said I did.
I
haven't heard back. I did reach out to them. Since you were there.
This should be
Comparison. They're real close.
You want to be part of this. Especially when two schools
I have the Eagle email, but everybody doesn't have to keep sending it to me.
I haven't seen it.
I've got three so far. No, we're doing a hot day, make sure people.
What's going on?
We're doing a park cleanup there, and we're restoring the part of it, but we're not going anywhere near the. It's just kidding. They're asking for clarification on what we intend to do and how we're protecting the I usually get them sent to me by email, and if she doesn't send them to me, I get them from It's just a cleanup.
We got the lights
There is a sign up, I just have to put it at a one, because it's getting kind of.
Is that one that's just like this wildlife?
Yeah, that's the one that's, which I told the reporter I wanted to replace, and I just haven't. It's on me.
The fourth statement watching.
It's on me.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, I don't think we keep that electronic, you know, scan them, but I mean,
So we don't have a 7 p.m. park stop. 7 p.m. park stop.
The county does something.
I think we're finishing the general fund and then talking about the CIP.
We actually need to power tool.
One can be optimistic. Talk to your bike rider watch. Kit.
It is true.
It's 5:40. 5:42 tomorrow, Friday, and then the upper 50. So I think we're pulling out of it.
So out of the whole 435 pages, there's only 60. What colors were you? I think you had and the whole kit.
two y'all?
I think, yeah, we had almost
No, I didn't, that was tongue in cheek.
That was a second check.
Bum, 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 bum.
I mean, people all the time. For a while. We got to all my questions. I'm the only one that have about those decreases. So I'm just, we'll cover
More than you do now.
Very good, everyone. Let's see, Mr. Payton. We are finished with,
We're moving on to engineering.
we are complete with the police, moving on to engineering. Okay, very good. Page 173.
173, you'll see for the first time, the engineering department in the budget. So all those positions, well, not all of them, but almost all of those positions are moved from other places in the organization except for one, I believe, which is which we talked about, which is an inspector that will be looking at our utility areas. So this person in reality is going to be a help to our pavement condition because they're going to be looking at underground and street cuts and other kinds of inspections that are going on, and it will help us do that. So this was kind of, it's tough to look at. There's no comparisons because it's all brand new, but I can tell you that if we had comparisons, except for the one position, it would all be very similar to what it would have been last year.
Help me understand this. I'm so sorry, Mr. Manning, go ahead.
A little less. We actually saved some money.
In their
It's all there.
services, that I give to you.
Mr. Manning?
Go ahead.
I'm still on 173. Describe for me the stormwater fund off to the side there.
What page do you have?
173.
There's one position that's dedicated to the stormwater fund, and actually, we will talk about stormwater fund on Monday of next week. So we'll actually do the stormwater fund, but that's Jacob, who's been in front of you to speak. That's his position is in engineering. So the engineering department is responsible for the stormwater fund.
Okay, all right, very good.
Does that make sense? Still got Mr.
In
Lane.
fact, I met him out at Patterson Pond.
Okay.
Had to, sorry, Mr. Manning.
No worries.
So engineering came from where then?
It came from utilities and public works primarily.
Okay, so you had engineers and utilities and public works, you took them out of there and put them in their own department?
Yes.
Okay, so now engineering is a department, not necessarily in utilities and funded by,
By those users
By
of their
those.
services. So electric and water and sewer fund both had engineers. Those engineers are now in this department,
funded still by them?
but they're still funded by those funds whose services they're still providing to them.
Right.
So it works like a typical internal service. But from our standpoint, it helps to, you can see how the cost allocation on 174.
So you might have an engineer in engineering who just does electrical things. You might have another engineer who do more traffic,
Right.
public works.
Except for, it also
Funding is just,
it gives us the opportunity that if we, two things it does. One, it helps us in engineering those projects and streets, to have all those folks together talking about what's happening. So when we do a street project, you've got electric, you've got water and sewer issues, you've got stormwater.
Right.
And we
They're
got
all in one place.
So we put them all together, and it also gives us a little bit of flexibility if we don't have a lot of electric projects right now, but we need a little extra help on a street project, you potentially have somebody that can come and help you do that.
kind of a consolidation.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else on engineering this time? Public Works, and here you'll see those 6 positions that were called engineering and stormwater. That's the 6 that have moved.
And that's the reduction.
Right. So you see a reduction here. You'll see other reductions as we continue next week in the utility areas. But those 6 reductions are going to make up part of that engineering department. Okay?
That's all people.
It's all people. Okay, so if you keep moving through there, 178 shows the general revenues that come in for public works. 179, so other general information. And then we'll go on to the expenditure side in 180. Again, the decrease there is basically because the engineering has been moved. So the engineering 600 went out, and their total decrease was by 400. You'll see in streets there's an increase of 275, and that is where we have our additional money for resurfacing efforts. Okay, and I will say, when I say resurfacing, there's I'm going to give Stephen the flexibility. There are some curb concrete work that needs to be done, so you get complaints from time to time of after big snows if we've damaged some curbs or those kind of things. So they'll spend some of that money. It's still in the street right away, but some of it might not officially be resurfacing. It might be fixing sidewalks or curbs with concrete, and then we'll still do as much resurfacing as we can. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious about the decreases in grounds and beautification. What accounts for that?
Grounds and beautification does mowing for ponds, so we're shifting some of the cost for pond mowing to the storm market.
So again, this is sort of moving people.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Costs, actually, no people there, just costs.
Costs.
Contract money.
Can I ask a question about paving? That's addressed here. You mentioned last night, I think, quickly, that there was some extra money in additional paving. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
And where would that show up?
That shows, if you look at the streets, that's in that general section, we've looked at streets 183. Right. It's on that general page, if you're looking at the general divisions, in that purchase service line item there, you see additional funds.
The 262,
Right. 250 of that is additional money to go to street.
Okay, and is there a list somewhere of what those streets are?
There is.
That is?
Actually, not of the 250.
What's that?
Not for the additional money.
Not for the additional?
Yeah, basically, when you go to the street page, there's $400,000 for residential. We had already anticipated 100 to 150 to go towards the higher rated roads. And what the additional 250 will allow us to do. Right now, we're looking at a cutoff of roads that are rated 50 and higher. We believe only require milling of the curb line and then resurfacing. And that costs us about $25 a foot to do that for a typical residential road. Roads that are rated below 50 most likely require the full milling and resurfacing, and that's about $45 to $50 a linear foot. So what we're trying to ascertain, we have the list of roads that qualify that are 50 and higher and 50 and below. We just have not finalized which roads will be included this time.
Look at page 291. That's your question, where your question's being answered of which streets and the ratings that are scheduled to be repaved with the basic money that we have in resurfacing. So you got a Godwin section, Sudley, another section of Godwin, Green Park Drive, and Diggs Road are the lowest rated roads that will be the first priority of what we address.
Okay, so that's the standard.
This was the original.
This is the original streets program.
If you look at the lowest line, miscellaneous, that's 400. We had anticipated 150. When I first was talking with council about our pavement program, we had identified about 100, 150 that we were going for. Mr. Pate has added 250 to that number. So that 400,000 accounts for the additional 250. And that's where we have not finalized on the specific roads that will be included in the residential.
So the residential paving has increased by 250. Thank you.
Mr. Lovejoy?
I got my question answered.
Okay, very good. What page was that on?
291.
291.
Is where the information on the street paving program is. And that's the biggest change in public works. Other than the engineering.
Oh, I'm not interested in this
Once council gets into picking streets,
Mine's
then
that bad.
the whole game is lost.
The whole game.
Do not want to be
Mine is on.
picking the streets.
Give us each a bunch.
As long as yoder is one of them.
No, it won't be.
That is
Even though it is
a bad place to be. Okay,
Home of council people.
There'll be the house there.
What, I'm surprised Plantation, I back on I looked on Plantation Lane the other day, and it's pretty bad, and.
Remember, this is 18, this is after July 1st. We're getting ready to start paving when the weather changes. Stonewall, Plantation, all the ones we talked about when we were on our drive, those are actually FY17, and they'll be done between now and June 30.
Great.
and just to get back up to Steve's point a little bit, our goal will be to not have things back down in the teens and the 20s in the future. We'll to keep everything up. And one of the ways that what he's talking about doing is, one of the ways you do that is you do some preventative maintenance when they're getting, right before they get to that tip over point. So we've got a lot to get back to where they need to be, and then we'll really focus on that. But some of them, we might be able to keep them from dipping into that hole level by doing some additional work on them now. So that's a traditional method that's been used by folks for a long time to try to deal with that. All right, anything else on Public Works? There's a variety of different divisions in there: traffic control, education, grounds, streets.
When do you think we might expect to hear back from what the council requested you all do with regard to the roundabout?
We need, or you want to answer those? I said, we need to solicit for professional services for engineer to do that. We're putting that RFP together now. We'll get that out and get that procured in the next couple of months. And then we'll actually procure it to do a full design. But what we'll do is we will have a clearly defined stopping point, or I say a pausing point, to say, okay, here's enough of a design to get a really good cost to where we can then come back and say, this is what we're talking about, make sure everybody's still comfortable with that. But we'll procure everything we need to at once, but we'll pause with, typically something like a 30-40% design is what you'd have to get to be able to really quantify that.
To get that sort of a number, that may be what I call a go, no-go.
Yeah, exactly. That'd probably be the fall.
Okay.
Take a little bit of time to get that done.
Yeah.
And that'll likely be one of our MBTA projects. All right, moving into community development, 189. Again, the first page there is talking about personnel, and if you add all those numbers up, you can see that we're basically taking neighborhood services, parks and recreation, and museum, and combining them into a culture and recreation division. So this is a reorganization that Liz and I have been working on for quite some time to make happen.
Explain department versus division in the city. Department is the big, I'm just curious, department is community development, right?
Correct.
Okay, under that department, there's divisions? Is that what it means? Okay, just want to check.
Mr. Lovejoy.
And just so when people ask, bring back the Parks and Rec department, our answer is we're bringing back a communication and rec division.
Culture.
Sorry. Sure. That is our first step into that process.
This may ultimately, and again, Liz and I have talked about this may ultimately become a separate department. At this point in time, I think it needs some more nurture, and so I think the right place for it to be is under Liz, and let her continue to work with the folks there to do that.
Where's it going to be? Where are these people going to be housed?
They're actually
Here now, right?
they're actually in the museum. Liz, you want to say what you've done in terms of people?
Sure. We've already started working on this because we're using existing staff and there's no budget impacts to it. We've moved Keisha and Kristen Zenich, so Keisha Wilson-Segunro and Kristen Zenich over to the museum. They were in Old Town Hall, and now they're over at the museum. Keisha's in the office where I was occasionally, if you remember when I was over there one day a week, and we've shifted all the resources around. That museum building is going to be the headquarters of Culture and Rec. One of the benefits of that is that building is open 7 days a week, particularly during the season. The Saturday and Sunday is beneficial because now you can do your park rentals, your field payments, your reservations now 7 days a week, either here at City Hall or over at the museum, and we've already started to publicize that. We're working on new website pages, so by April 1st, we're going to go live with a new Culture and Rec website under the city's website, not as a separate, but under the city's. You're going to be able to do everything online, pay for your park reservations, do all of that. So it came out of the needs assessment. It's a enhanced customer service and more streamlined service delivery.
From our perspective, it's a very well thought out way of dealing with this, and it's based a lot, again, on citizen input, both coming out of the citizen satisfaction survey, and then Liz and her department have done a tremendous amount of work reaching out to the community and those stakeholders that are involved to talk about how this might work and looking at how things have been working and what ways they wanted to see it improved. And so I think this will be a tremendous positive to the community and the ability to understand what's happening in our culture and recreational facilities and to be able to use them, schedule them, etc. So I'm really excited for this change.
And just for my education, then what is going in the second story of Old Town Hall?
We currently still use that facility. We moved a lot of our archives and artifacts
out of the museum and into that back room where Keisha was.
Right.
So we're continuing to use that. That's
That's the office space.
as an office space. Yeah, we can still maintain a computer there, and the curator's there about 1 day a week doing curatorial on the artifacts that are up there. And one thing I would mention is, as to Councilmember Vaney's question, the public doesn't also care one way or another whether it's a division or department. They'll probably sort of organizationally think about it as a department, particularly it's over at the museum and in a separate facility, but it will be under community development and I'll be the department head for it.
Yeah, department division is
Yeah.
is an internal breakdown of how we do it.
And Keisha, if I could, just real quick also, so Keisha will be the manager. We're going to be shifting some of the housing and neighborhood work off of Keisha into planning and zoning. Planning and zoning now is going to maintain the HOA contact list. We're going to go live with a new housing resource site with direct links to the county CDBG program and all that. So Matt and code enforcement under community appearance is taking over the bulk of that housing work that Keisha was doing. She'll still be in neighborhoods, but she'll be organized around parks now. So that's how we're restructuring the neighborhood services function.
And this is another, they're not, this is the biggest change going on in community development. As I mentioned, or as the request was, what other things have been talked about. Liz did it at my request, put forth a proposed position, a planner position to focus on housing and redevelopment activities. That is not included in the budget at this time for this year. There are some other things that are going on right now that Liz is working with that we would like to see completed, particularly some of the work that's being done on the South Grant or south of downtown housing area study, and to see what strategies come out of that in terms of things that we might want to do before we look at adding staff that might be able to administer some of those programs to deal with that priority you have of trying to continue to beef up the housing stock in the community. Understand?
Yep.
So in terms of the things that are not included, that's another one of those things that are not included in the budget this year. But
Yes.
you very well might be seeing that come back to you in the years to come. Okay. Anything else on community development? Most of the planning and the permitting development services side are continuing to do the job that they're doing now. Again, they don't get as much love as some of the other areas like public safety, but if you look at their...
They go on a separate salary scale.
They might, but they're not putting them in a
Planners
separate...
are very hard to.
Yeah.
Planners are hard to find. That's good ones anyways. I lost my train of thought. It's going to go a little bit more, but economic development.
On to page 199 or something?
199. No changes in staffing there, although as we've talked about in the past, there's always been intent for economic development to probably be relocated in a separate area at some point in time. If we do that, I'm not sure that a half-time administrative position will be enough to support what they need to do. So you could see me coming back to you to increase that to a full-time position at some point in the future as we continue to work through the changes in this building and opening it up. We'll be looking at some of those issues. But for the upcoming year, there really isn't significant changes there. We're continuing with the various programs we put in place, including the pilot programs for facade and for landscaping.
Mr. Vaney has a thought.
Is the admin assistant, the halftime, is that shared with another department or division, or is that just a halftime person?
It's a vacant position.
It's a vacant position.
Right. Quite honestly, they're getting support now from another the finance administrative support position is helping to support them based on where we're located. Yeah. And there may be some, I say that there may be some other reorganizations that might help take care of that as we move along as well. Unless there's questions about economic development, non-departmental is 203. don't think a lot to talk about there on the revenue side, except for I will say that there are some federal grants we talked about earlier that are included in the budget up front as anticipated. That those monies wouldn't be allocated until we actually receive those grants. In the 204 shows you a breakdown of the various areas. So you'll see the budget. It says budget agreement, school support, the $55.6 million, the $1.4 million increase is shown in our non-departmental. You realize the school board will be here to do a joint meeting with you in April, and you'll get more information from them on their budgets. You see some transfers to the various funds. The large one there is a transfer to capital improvement fund. That one is being supported, as we talked about, with one-time capital reserves to basically deal with a couple projects we'll mention again when we get the CIP. Debt service fund is going up. We've got a little bit of money putting into there that we talked about last year that we had allocated towards doing that. You see the $450 that's set aside right now for potential transit, the contingency that's normally there, and then you see the salary contingency, which includes all the new positions, merits, all those things that would happen, health insurance increases, et cetera.
This is where those are until they're approved, right?
Correct.
Pam?
Yes. Got it.
In contributions and donations, I don't have anything for you right now. We've got let me back up. We've gotten a lot of requests from nonprofits for contributions and donations, so we'll begin the process of going through those here shortly. I would say, do you remember off the top of your head how much requests we got? I think it was 250 or 300,
Yeah.
somewhere in that range of requests for donations, but it's in the budget at the same level as it has been. Yes.
And I presume you'll bring that back to council?
We'll bring that back to you as part of the process.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. So we're gonna see the list of everybody who applied and how much they requested?
Yes,
And then,
like we have in the past.
and you have a process where you're going to make those decisions internally? How are you handling that? Okay.
Well, just like, since I've been here, I know it's been done different ways, but
Right.
since I've been here, we've basically come back to you, unless you want to increase the amount or decrease the amount, but we've taken the amount that's been there and we've come back with our internal process to tell you, here's how we would recommend that you allocate those, and then y'all approve that as part of the final budget.
Okay, so we'll see that.
Yes.
Great, thanks. As well as everybody who applied, not just your final list.
The list, the sheet that we give you always
We'll have-
shows everybody that applied,
Great.
plus
Thank
the
you.
recommended amounts, and it shows the past couple of years of what they've got. Okay? So we'll be coming back with that one. That's basically the general fund. And what I wanted to do, I know we're getting a little bit late, but I wanted to move into the CIP and the part of that's supported by the general tax rate, general fund as well.
Okay. Over to another tab, is that it?
Yes. I think we're going to start at there's a lot of summary information. I think I'm going to go ahead and just start at the actual pages of the departments. So starting with the general government program on 339. Okay, Diane is suggesting we start at page 319, and then we'll go to 339. And again, there's a variety of breakdowns of the different funds and monies that are there. This 319 gives you a snapshot of what's being supported with general tax dollars so the general fund support for capital projects. So we'll go back through and talk about these individual projects. So you can see general government, culture and rec, public safety, some transportation dollars.
In the city manager's budget.
In the city manager's recommended budget.
You call this pay-go?
Yes, we would call this pay-as-you-go. This portion of it. There are some debt pieces that we talked about yesterday that are recommended but are not funded because those need debt funding and a revenue source to pay for those.
So the list we saw.
Yesterday, yes. So go back to 339 on the general government programs. And well, that's where it starts. We'll just go on over to the actual pages, starting on page 342, the actual projects.
So what you're doing is you're going over the individual pages for those items on 319.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're on 319?
So 342, 319 is you can refer back to see all of the general fund projects. 342 is the continuing City Hall improvements and renovations. There's some additional work. We have some bond money set aside, but also there's work on a new generator for this building that we're looking at funding to actually add electric funds to help do peak load shading, as well as provide a backup generation to this building. And I believe the other part is some roof work, isn't it? Some roof work at City Hall that needs to be done by our building maintenance group. And then the next page, the Public Works and Utilities facility improvements. You want to explain what we're doing, Brian?
This is, we've had a space study done. We looked at, this has been in the CIP for some time. You see the prior years, there's budget for the prior years, and so we're looking at sort of the best out. We're just like everywhere else, we're crammed for space, both for people and then equipment, and storage of plans and all kinds of things like that. So this is looking at actually doing some renovation, interior renovation, possible expansion of the main building, Building A, as well as some new perimeter fencing to replace what we have.
And I should have mentioned, the funds for this project actually in this year is all coming from utilities. It's all budgeted in the water, sewer, and the electric fund. So there is no general fund dollars related to this project until 2020. There's a little bit of money related to public works in there. Okay, then the next section is talking about culture and recreation programs. So really the first page we'll start at page 350, which is the museum library. There's 175 that's in one-time funds this year that's to be used for a feasibility study that Liz is working on right now. And what we hope to do from that is to actually get the community input of what they think they would like or would want to have in this kind of a facility, and then get it at least down to probably some preliminary.
The one that we're wrapping up now?
No, the 175.
175 is to do community engagement, and then also to do a site survey and topo for that property, and we have to clean up some property line issues with the street. But the big thing is the community engagement and sort of next phase schematic design, which will refine our costs.
Right, so we'll have a good estimate of what it's going to be, and we'll be looking at how we might be funding alternatives for that project as well.
Mr. Vane?
Does this study assume the location that you showed us there at the present location?
It assumes the downtown.
Okay, so you're looking at alternative?
No, I'm sorry, it assumes the museum site, but not the exact location on the museum
Oh, that's
site.
fine.
Okay, is there any thought to looking at other potential sites or your?
Land acquisition was not something that was potentially in the budget, so that's not something that we've looked at now.
But I think it's fair to say that if, out of the community input, if other sites become, are available, or that people really see a site that they think would work well, I think we could look at that as a part of what
Yeah, the building itself would not necessarily, at least in this stage, the building is not so set that it has to be on that site. If another site becomes available, then whatever work we've done on the building can move over to that other site. We're not that site specific yet.
I'm hearing some concerns about the site, maybe it's just me.
It seems to be a trend in this community, no matter what you propose. Just concerns with anything we might do.
Okay, so just a question, the study of that, with this $175,000, would look at the entire piece of property owned by the city?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
So another part of this issue in reality would be that this will give us some more detailed information for whatever might happen.
Correct,
That's all.
right.
But to be clear, there will be clearly advertised community engagement initiatives so that people with those concerns can come forward and have them
Correct.
flushed out.
If there are any concerns that anyone can share with me, I'd like them up front, but the big bulk of FY18 would be community engagement, yes.
Got it. So people will have fair opportunity to come and
Yes.
learn.
People
and
let us
share.
know what it is that they would like.
Nothing.
But what I've heard is people don't want to lose the green.
Green space.
That's.
But also,
I've heard that.
I don't think they've seen the designs to show that that's a part of it. That's
Well,
like building up to the curb or something. So,
Yeah, again, it's helpful if people don't come in with a whole lot of preconceived notions of what might be there or what might not be there. You know, give us some, provide the input, and tell us what they would like to see, and let's see if we can work on some issues that might help that.
Ms. Sebastian.
I've also heard, Liz, that there's a lot of concern with putting the library there when it's our last big piece of property to consider any type of economic development. If they were going to put something there, they would rather see something that was more economic driven than a library. But we've never talked about any of that, so I don't know what things you all might have thought about in the past before you determine that site. I think as this information gets out, it'll give a good opportunity for the public to give you and all of us a lot of feedback as to what they think. But those are the two things that I heard as well: the green space and where it's located. Of course, is very close to downtown with economic development.
Mr. Lovejoy.
And just so I understand what I'm seeing here, so our current operating theory is we would be on the hook for 10 million in bonds, and our hope is to find 7 million elsewhere in other sources, or I guess 8 million in other sources.
Well, this is just the city manager's budget. Right, aren't we talking about?
Certainly not mine.
I thought this was what you've got included in your.
Right, that's where the 10 came from, but you're assuming another 8. So the actual cost of the project is 18 million.
That's
also.
correct.
And so you're assuming,
A preliminary, we're talking about the bonds, about
that's just what I'm trying to get
10
at.
million of bonds.
Total bond,
Support
okay.
that.
So you're assuming in the long run 18-ish, and then 8 from somewhere, and then 10 from us. Okay, that's all, just trying to,
That is correct. That's our
Other sources.
assumption.
other sources. We're gonna hit each of us up per million.
You've got it.
No,
That hasn't been high on the list of
we're not the donors you're looking for.
potential people to look for. But again, the issue is to answer all that questions and to get the public input, we need to go out and do a process, and that's what we've got planned in here. And it's not, there's no absolutes that we're going in that says this has to be here, even that the museum has to be built. But I think we want to put this idea out there, and let's find out what the public's viewpoints on it are. Dean Park is the next one that's there. I'm only going to mention this in the CIP, with no money in next year, so this is a year out for planning, and then 2020 is when the school system wants to be looking at doing the Dean Elementary School, so we need to be doing our conceptual work in conjunction with what might happen to the school.
So I actually had a question about that, because there's, where is the planning funds? Because it's not just on this page. Where are those?
Where are the, I'm sorry, the,
Planning funds that are happening in FY18?
in Dean Park, there are none.
So this,
We did some preliminary design, some concept pieces. Right now, one of the next things you're looking at is coming back with some RFPs on what the E.G. Smith complex might or might not look like.
okay.
That will probably feed into what happens at Dean Park. And then we are taking a look at the schools as they do their conceptual work on how the new school, the replacement school would look on the site as well. So they probably have a little bit of, I don't know if they've got any money next year or not either.
I don't believe so. I believe that the planning and architecture engineering doesn't start until FY19. So no one's expecting, other than some staff resources for some more, a little bit of in-house work, no one's expecting any major design in FY18.
But Liz is working on a dog park.
If the sponsors step forward, because that's not funded.
Mr. Vaney.
I've got a couple questions on Dean Park. So this is a little confusing here. So GMBL relocation of those ball fields could or could not go to the new Dean Park. Is is it possible that it could go there?
The-
I'm not saying I support it or don't, I get asked that question,
We hear that a lot from.
well, and it's still being asked a lot, so.
I'm not saying whether I support it or not. If you look at page 353, you've got another project, that's the E.G. Smith Baseball Complex.
Right, but just to answer my question, So Dean Park, there's a plan for Dean Park.
There's a master plan, there are
And
two
it's-
master plan concepts for
Two
Dean Park,
concepts.
if I might,
Yeah.
Mr. Pate, I'm
Yes.
sorry. If I might. The project that we did in FY17 created two alternative concept plans for
Right.
Dean Park. One of them does relocate E.G. Smith, the 8 ball fields that are currently at E.G. Smith, relocates them to Dean. However, in that relocation, you lose fields overall in the city of Manassas, because there are 4 existing at Dean Park currently for a total of 12.
Okay.
So the answer to your question is yes, you can relocate E.G. Smith, but you lose diamond ball fields total in the city, because you can't fit 12
You
at
don't
Dean
really want
Park.
to do that.
Correct.
So the answer is really kind of no. E.G. Smith, from a practical standpoint,
Correct. The staff recommendation is that E.G. Smith does not relocate over to Dean to cut to the chase,
yes.
because there is no place to replace all those, there's no location to replace all those ball fields.
Okay.
So let me be careful on that one. There is no specific staff recommendation on that at this point in time. What we are telling you that if you want to move E.G. Smith ball fields to Dean Park, that you will lose the existing amenities at Dean Park that we would
Okay, fair enough.
recommend that you replace somewhere else.
Okay.
So if you look at, I think from a staff perspective, if you forget about E.G. Smith, if you just took the Dean Park concept and said, based on the needs of the city, how would we design this park? That is concept 2 that the staff.
Which has soccer fields, baseball fields,
Open
and a
play
dog
areas,
park.
Combination of
dog park.
Has all those things.
That's correct.
Okay. And, so I understand that. And then the dog park issue with Wellington is separate from the dog park at Dean. Is that correct?
No, it's gotten wrapped up together, because, just very quickly, the Wellington community wants to do a dog park, and they're interested in, originally they were looking at doing the dog park on their property at the HOA, somewhere over where the pool is, or where they have community land. When they found out that the city had one proposed at Dean Park, they said, well, we'll be willing to take our funds and put them into the one at Dean Park, because it's so close to our community, and then they wouldn't do one on Wellington. So the last I heard from them, when I indicated to them that we wouldn't be doing a dog park until the fall, was that they were still interested in putting their contributions towards the Dean Park. So that's how Wellington got involved. Because as I mentioned earlier, currently we're not proposing a dog park. We don't have the funding set aside in any of our park improvement money. That wouldn't be a CIP project, it's just park improvement money. But if sponsors come forward and they're ready to build it, then pretty much anyone wants to build will take sponsorship money and put it someplace in our parks.
And just so I understand it correctly, any hypothetical location of the dog park that's been discussed is not inside of the immediate footprint of what we're doing at Dean. It's adjacent to it. So whatever we end up putting there, the dog park's around the edge.
Correct.
Okay, right. So
Correct,
it's not.
those are the two.
So it's not part of the 4 million?
No.
No.
And so if you do ball fields or soccer fields, whatever you do, it doesn't affect the dog park concept
The
because
dog park can stay there,
it's around the edge.
Right.
So it'll work either way.
Correct.
So I guess I have to make a comment here. And I'm a little concerned about what I'm hearing. I know Ms. Sebeski just indicated that you couldn't replace the GMBL ball fields with over at the Dean Park facility. I may be the only one that was on the council at the time that was done. And I can tell you that the city staff told the council at that time that if Micron wanted the GMBL ball fields to build a second fab, that the council could initiate the purchase, which it did, of the 20 acres or so behind Dean. In order to build the same number of fields that are there at the Smith facility. Now, I'm just indicating what was told to the council at that time.
I think that's an accurate statement. I think the point is, you're going to go from 12 fields total in the city to 9 or 10.
If you built new ball fields on the 20 acres that were purchased, that may be true, but I'm not aware that we did that. Now, that's another thing to talk about. It's not part of this discussion tonight, but I had to say it because that's my understanding. And I don't want misinformation getting out there. And I may be wrong. Maybe the city has built facilities on the 20 acres that I'm totally unaware of. And if it is, then let me know.
Isn't that where the fields are back in the corner? Those 2 new fields, 3 fields?
I would have to get the exact boundaries to answer that question. The 20 acres, I don't know, well, let me go back to your question, Councilmember Wolf. I don't know when those 2 fields, they might have been after this
They're relatively new
discussion.
fields compared to the
They're
one in front.
relatively new fields, and so they might have built in. The other thing I would comment that when, and I wasn't on the city at the time, but I looked at the plans for that. Those original sketches, if you were, did not include restrooms or parking or anything to go along with what those fields. I also think that there's been a field added, 1 or 2 fields added at E.G. Smith, potentially, but I don't have that particular detail.
I'm just bringing it up. Staff can help me with that at another time. This is not directly, at least related to the perfect planning that we need to do for Dean and what might take place there. Frankly, this council is going to make the decision about what happens. I just want to make sure that I'm relaying information that I think I know.
I believe the mayor is correct, that that's what the council at the time was told, is that those fields would move over.
And I know of no change in between that time and now that would change that.
Except you got new staff and you're basically, we're looking at what would actually really work there now.
I get all that. I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that the information is correct. That's all I'm suggesting. This council is going to make the decision about what takes place there in the future.
Absolutely.
I'm confident about that.
And it's really, again, the Dean Park that's in here and it doesn't have anybody next year, this has been in your CIP for several years, a couple of years now. The new thing that's in the CIP is the baseball complex, the $9 million, which theoretically could come from donations if somebody decided to develop that, felt like they could develop that and then build a complex somewhere close by. Well, time will tell over the next year as we get those RFPs what's going to go on. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done before we really need to spend a whole lot of time debating what's really going to happen there.
I agree. Mr. Wolf?
How comfortable are we with the $9 million number? Since we've now made it public.
Ballpark for a
It's a
ballpark.
ballpark for a ballpark.
You mean to replace them, is that the 9 million you're saying?
No, you're talking about making it a sports complex, which I think is a different thing than replacing existing fields, or refurbishing existing fields.
Yes, that's not just refurbishing those fields, that's actually talking about making a sports complex there.
But not a stadium complex. So
No.
there's something in between.
Okay, all right.
Where you play.
know what you're
Where
talking
you
about.
play.
Play, not a,
Not,
Not a
Professional
destination,
level.
Not a
tournament level,
destination, right.
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
This is a holding number, you know.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's going to be out there and people are going to talk about it, and I want to make sure we all understand what the number relates to.
Okay. To move us along, we'll have more.
I'm so sorry, can I ask some questions? Regarding what you brought up, sir. When the city joined with the Boys and Girls Club, was some of that 20 acres allocated to that?
No.
That's beside the 20 acres. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is, I think the 2 fields that are there near where the new skateboard park is, that's the ones I think we're not sure about. I know the property behind that was all purchased, as the mayor said, at that time to replace the E.G. Smith ball fields. And I think there was a layout that was done that basically just took fields and put them out on that as a concept. I don't know if that was 6 fields or how many fields on that park, and said, yes, these fields could be put here. I think what we would tell you today is that was not a well thought out plan. Not
Like
that
you
it was-
said, lots of things change in development and understanding their count as well as the, bathroom
Absolutely.
space and all of those things.
But there's a lot of things in play in here, so that I wouldn't say that you can't do that, something there. Council's gonna have to decide what the right mix of fields and recreational facilities are in the community and how we're gonna go about building those and the other things we're doing. But to get back to 352, which is a project that's in the 18 budget that I want to make sure you're aware of, is Stonewall Park and Pool. This is, again, a good chunk of this is looking at the whole Stonewall Park and how we might ultimately redesign and look at that field. There are some linear fields in that park and a lot of wooded area that we want to look at what could be done with that. And there are some specific improvements to the pool as well that we need to look at. And one of the things that's added in here is to actually create some part of a splash pad kind of facility. Splay ground is what they got in here. Splash pad. That's probably because it's a little different than the splash pad. We're going to have something fun for the kids to play in at a low depth of water that sprays out so they have fun. That's included with one-time funds in this budget.
When we toured, there was some definite infrastructure upgrades that needed to happen. Is that included in this one?
No.
The assessment
of
is
those.
included. We need a structural engineer to take a look at some of that, and so that's included in this, is to have that assessment.
The assessment, but not the actual.
But not the actual, no.
And so we're not considering the actual until after 4 years.
After 4 years. No, we'll probably come back. When we have the structural assessment, we have actual cost of what needs to be done to that facility, it'll probably come back to you sooner rather than later.
So we won't be updating the bathrooms and stuff like that until after the structural engineer looks at everything and we make a decision. Is that my understanding?
Correct. You won't have any updates to the facility this fiscal year, or this season, I should say, this season. I will, however, note, for those of you that got emails last season about pool chairs, the pool chairs are already been delivered. We have 100 brand new Shays lounges, and they'll be out there on day 1. So you can let everybody know that that's been done.
Good news.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Moving to the future.
I think people will see that and it's good to know.
And then skipping over, because I don't want to talk about E.G. Smith Baseball Complex again. So 354 is Lee Manor Park. That is money to replace the existing park, and actually, from the way Liz described this one, I think creates a lot of enhancements to that park and that area for the community. If you agree to put the fire station where the existing tennis courts are.
Right. So the existing Lee Manor Park is under 4 acres. It's about 4.5 acres. The city owns 5 acres behind the elementary school that currently there's a stormwater pond on it. That's about 5 acres. So we are proposing that as a replacement park, if you will. We do have a goal of no net loss of park and open space. So we would take the 4 point some acres for fire station, replace it with the 5 acres. We're pretty sure we can put the tennis courts there, so that's the 150. We also have in a separate line item, you'll remember that we share playground improvement money with the school. We contribute 30 and the schools contribute 30. So that's 60 total that we're looking at putting into Round Elementary playground. So 150 plus 60 would go into park enhancements in FY18 in conjunction with the construction of the fire station.
Do you plan on bringing that up to
Yes.
This is Princeton County. I mean, it's in the county.
Okay.
Yes, we do intend on bringing that up. That is part of the March 21st presentation.
Then on, unless there's a question about Lee Manor Park on 355, you'll see things that we actually don't classify as capital improvements, but are a part of our capital funding, particularly the culture and rec, the school playground equipment, some museum improvements. A lot of those are building improvements, roofing and other things that need to be done, potentially train depot, candy factory, and some general park improvements that are listed in there. And those are ongoing programs that we've been doing. The next section is public safety. I know we're running a little bit past our 2-hour limit, although you didn't give me an official limit. The big issues here are on page 362, as we've talked about, the public safety facility. And as Mr. Hayden said earlier, this is a part of that group of projects that are bond funded that I've asked you to look at, considering how you want to move forward with it and how you would fund it, either funding it now with an increase that would carry forward, or looking at doing that at a later time with a different funding stream.
Just a question. You're not suggesting by that the date will change for moving forward with the public safety facility. You're just talking about when the tax rate might be applied in order to afford it and other things.
Right. Both of those scenarios assume that the public safety facility moves forward in 19 as it's shown.
Okay. All right. Very good.
That picture is,
I'm sorry, I just mentioned that's actually Gateway.
Taking a picture of the corner of like in front of the chamber building.
Yes, it's in front of the chamber building. Very good eye. Yes, we just mentioned that. We'll correct that in the final.
All right, so that's not where.
That is not where it's going.
Okay.
I thought it was just indicating blue sky.
We took the buildings down and typed the field.
Mr. Page, just a question. Public safety facility, I know there was some discussion initially that it would be police and fire and rescue administration. Is that still in the plan?
That's still a possibility.
Okay.
So we are looking at
I get that.
at a couple of options, but the way it is being designed, it could accommodate both. It could accommodate being in police headquarters and fire administrative location as well.
Yes, sir.
how do the PD headquarter improvements figure into the public safety facility? I mean, in your opinion, you've got to do those improvements anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
The things that we're actually doing here, that we've been doing in the police headquarters, and Doug's left now, but all of that's being done so that it's transferable. And the reality is a lot of this is modular furniture that's being put in to accommodate the officers that we have, because we just don't have enough space in there for the people that we have. So we're trying to maximize that. All of that can be relocated into the new building.
And the police headquarters themselves now could be repurposed for another?
Yes, absolutely. And the expectation is that it would be repurposed. I mean, theoretically, again, there could be some private sector interest in it, but we believe there's some public.
We have space needs?
Yeah, there's some space needs that I think would be accommodated in there too. And then Fire Station 21's on that, the next page is already funded, so you don't have to worry about that one. Let's move on to transportation.